Hi guys. So right now you should be able to see what's on my screen. I am looking at the concept tutorial sign-up sheet. Navigate your way there, jump on Zoom if you are not currently on Zoom, and also go to the tiny URL that will link you to a Google Drive. In the Google Drive, you guys are going to see a bunch of different PNGs that I have already taken and clipped out in Photoshop to make your life a little bit easier. You do not need to use these. You can use anything you like, but these are here so that you guys aren't going to spend the first 20-30 minutes of class trying to find the perfect piece of clothing or the perfect photograph or anything like that. You are welcome to use things that are not in here. This is just a starting point. If you kind of like look through here, just right click and download anything that interests you. So some of these are, for instance, people's faces. We have some miscellaneous objects that perhaps could be like have their purposes changed. We have some things that are very clearly items of clothing. Again, your call, just play around. You're welcome to also Google stuff, but don't spend ages trying to find photos online. It is much better to take this as an opportunity to try making something with what you're given or with a limited amount of material instead of trying to make it perfect. The miscellaneous folder contains miscellaneous images that you also might be able to strip certain parts of. We have a jacket here with a sort of like lovely sort of long fur lining. We have some medieval cloaks. You'll notice that everything here is a little bit medieval in terms of references. It's because everything here is from the Met Museum or Google. The people are mostly from Google. I don't know who these people are, but ideally, if you're using references, you will keep tabs on these things. You'll make sure you're not using someone else's art. You are making sure if you're using things like pieces from the Met, you are still taking them, changing them, adapting them. The point of doing things like photocomping isn't to make a very beautiful, final, polished piece of art. It is to enable you to explore ideas really fast a lot of the time, and to be able to quickly bring your idea to fruition, whatever that looks like. So you can, of course, take the things you do here and polish them further, make them pretty, make them exciting. It is your call. But for now, you just want to kind of be building up the general approximate shape of a person. I have some examples of things I've done recently that were photocomping and then painting over them, which is kind of what we're going to be demonstrating here. These are all things where I spent a bit longer than on these than you guys are going to have, but they're all using the bases of different existing photographs. This was a skirt from somewhere. This was a face from somewhere else. This embroidery was taken from, I think, a bodice of something completely different. And then, you know, through a combination of painting over and adjustment and all of these things, you get to build up a sense of whatever it is you want to achieve. So so a lot of these references basically are already kind of full body. A lot of the kind of photographs, as you'll see, especially the ones that are like using a sort of dress, they'll kind of be taking up the entire space of the person. You can also go and grab yourself some reference from somewhere like this person. You want to make sure that your reference is roughly the same pose as the pieces of clothing you're going to be using if you're not going to be doing a lot of changing. So you don't want a complex pose right now. You want something simple. Go look in the folder of standing things, for instance, and see what's in there. I posted that in chat as well, just to give you somewhere to start. You're welcome to obviously use your own or to not do a human base at all. So I'm going to share my other screen. Okay, desktop 2, excellent. So download a couple images from the Google folder as a starting point. You're focusing on big stuff. You are focusing on what, like, say, like, you know, things that take up the entirety of the body. You're not trying to focus on just a face or just a small body part. If you are using a photograph that has a background attached to it, so one of the ones that isn't something I brought in, you want to copy and paste that or put that into Photoshop, and you want to just try and mask that. So you should be able to see my page currently. Yeah, you can. Okay. So if you have the layer of an image you want to clip out selected, go to select and mask, and you will be able to cut out objects from this, which is what I've done with all of these PNGs of dresses and things. The fast and easy way is often just hitting select subject up here in the top left. It isn't perfect, but it's often pretty good. I can see how well it's done by moving the transparency here. Yep, that's a pretty good one. I'm just going to hit OK. And there we go. I have my person now. So as you can see, this is using a clipping mask right now. I want to just basically have this person. I don't want the clipping mask. I, of course, am using a very slightly different version of Photoshop to everyone else when I'm doing this at home. But what I'm doing here is I'm just inverting my selection and deleting what I have using shortcut keys. Invert can be done using select and inverse up here, or Command Shift I believe I just managed to successfully press. Okay, so you don't need to have a human base, but you can if you want. I am just the demonstration. Firstly, I want to flip my person. I'm going to just go to Edit, Transform, and Flip Horizontal. What I'm using here is pretty much the base of the body so that I'm not distorting the shape of the body too much. And as a starting point, I have this absolutely hideous orange dress. So I have brought this into Photoshop by going to File, Place Embedded, and then choosing it from my downloads. Once I do that, I can hit, it will appear like this, but I won't be able to edit it because it is currently going to be a smart object of some kind, or God, it's not a smart object, it's something else. The important thing is that if you right click, if I try and draw on this layer right now, it goes, I don't want this. And it asks if I want to rasterize it, and I do. That just basically means I can now do whatever I want to this layer. I can draw on it, I can cut it out. There's no reason not to do this as far as I can tell. I'm just going to sort of start quickly looking at, say, this dress here and thinking about what I could do with a part of it. So a lot of this is going to be trying stuff out and seeing how it goes. So let's say I want to maybe make some pants for my character out of a piece of this dress. I've decided I'm going to use sort of this chunk of the dress here. And so I'm doing a lot of just cutting things out using, say, the lasso tool, rotating things, and using my favorite thing, which is the warp mode, which is up here in the top of the page once I have kind of the bounding box selected. So if I can't see this thing's in the top bar, but I do have my object selected, I just click one of the little white squares on the outside, and it will allow me to access things like embiggen and warp mode, my favorite. So in warp mode, it's kind of what it sounds like. I can start taking this and just kind of changing the shape of what I've got happening here. I'm not worried about it being beautiful. It doesn't need to be, it just needs to vaguely resemble what I want, which is I'm making this into some sort of interesting balloon pants. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to get another chunk of the dress. So doing this will allow me to preserve a lot of the detail in the clothing, even though if I zoomed in right now, I would be able to see, yeah, I have distorted things a little bit, that's fine. But I'm keeping some of this texture. I'm keeping some of the folds, and I can just really quickly see what would this look like if I made it into some horrible little pants like this. So I can also go back in and select smaller chunks, and I could warp these to fit a little better. I could make sure I'm deselecting this chunk, and I could use my, let's see, I could just start sort of like cutting into the edges of this and helping give a little more shape to my horrible little balloon pants that I have given this character. So as I'm doing this, you know, some of what I'm doing, I might spend a little bit of time. I might really focus on making sure it works, but right now, the overall impression I want is what matters. So, okay, that works well enough for me. I'm just going to delete the rest of this dress because I don't need it. And let's see, maybe I want to now change the color of these pants. So you should do this sensibly using adjustment layers because adjustment layers are flexible. So if you have a Photoshop that looks anything like mine, you have not set it up before class and it is deeply ugly, but in general, you want to make sure that layers are visible. And if you don't see adjustment layers open, you want to go to Window and Adjustments. And that pops up with, no, I wanted it. I wanted it open. That pops up with this window here. So as I hover over each of these, it'll tell me what I can change, what I can do in each of these sections. Oh my God, go away. There we go. And what I want right now, for instance, is going to be, I'm just finding the one I want. I want selective color. So selective color allows me to take all of an area of a range of colors within an image and then change just those. So let's say I want to change the reds of this. I can now start pushing and pulling some of these colors. And as I do this, you can see it changing the color of the pants. You can also see it changing the color of the person, which is not intended. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure that my adjustment layer is on top of my pants layer. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to make it a clipping mask, but I'm not very good at it. Oh, someone else's computer, my curse. There we go, create clipping mask. Okay, so right click and create clipping mask here should do this. And now when I adjust this section, only the pants themselves are being adjusted in terms of color. I can use this to make things darker, lighter. I can adjust multiple color ranges at once. So I could go in and also play around with some of the kind of gold tones and try and make them green or something instead. As you can see, I'm not really thinking tremendously right now about what I'm going to do with color. So I am making some kind of ugly stuff. You guys are welcome to make things that are a little less ugly or not, as you prefer. For this, don't worry about making this into something necessarily fantastic and meaningful and the best character you have ever designed. Aim for making something fast, which is always fun. Okay, so I've now changed these into a very interesting color combination of green and pink. And I want to bring in another object that I'm going to start photocomping again. So this is part of, I think it's a lovely like ceremonial dress from Norway or something. Ideally, you will be thinking about, say, where you are getting a lot of your materials from. For this demonstration, it is a little better just to be thinking about how I can show you guys things fast. But you know, as you are doing things like photocomping, you do want to be considering, okay, what am I saying through my use of these particular items or these particular cultural artifacts or patterns or shapes? So again, with this one here, I am just using the warp tool at this point to kind of resize and play around with what's happening with my character here. I'm not trying to line things up perfectly. That's totally fine. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a little bit of cutting out like this. And I might also go to my paint tool here, just my normal paintbrush, and using my color picker, which is holding down Option on a Mac and something that's basically in the same place on the keyboard on Windows that I don't recall. You can just sort of start quickly overpainting certain areas. So maybe I want to just give my character here slightly spiky little elbow pieces. So I'm doing this fast and I'm staying zoomed out, which is in my experience quite important. You don't want to be zooming in for this. You don't want to be worrying about if things are the most beautiful possible option they could ever be. You just want to be using sort of big broad shapes to explore what things might look like. So as I'm doing this, I can quite easily decide whether or not I like what I'm doing because I'm staying nice and big I'm doing things nice and fast. And if it looks ugly, that's fine. If it doesn't look ugly, I can kind of see what the shape of it's going to be. I can kind of see how it might work, how I might improve it in the future. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to go in and now adjust my colors on this layer as well. So same as before, but this time I might use color balance. All of these do similar things with varying degrees of function. Again, I'm making sure this is a clipping mask, so it's only going to change the colors of the shirt that I've put on this character, and I'm not working with a color palette in mind, which you might have guessed. So color balance allows you to change shadows, midtones, highlights. This is a super useful tool and you need to learn to use it. It comes in so beneficial so much of the time. So as you can see, as I'm doing this, some areas that I've overpainted, we are getting a slightly weird effect on, that's fine. We're doing things fast, so you can just go in and change things that don't work for you in a minute's time. You can go in and repaint things. The benefit of not spending a long amount of time on any particular area of clothing or painting or anything like that is that you're not super attached to it. So if you end up being like, well, this isn't working for me, then that is just fine. So let's say I want to now paint over my my shirt here, and I want to be able to just sort of like combine these layers potentially. If I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be changing the color of my shirt anymore using this color balance tool, selecting both of them, okay, using somebody else's computer makes me there we go. Selecting both and right-clicking allows me to merge layers. This just now means this is an editable layer that I can draw on. Again, I wouldn't maybe do this if I might want to make some changes later or I wasn't really sold on what I was doing. But what I can do here now is be like, okay, I've decided I like this sort of shirt bit, but I didn't like the thing below it. This is a great stage for just practicing seeing what you like. So I'm not super attached to any of these particular elements. It doesn't matter to me if things end up a little strange. It doesn't matter if things aren't going to do what I expected them to do. So as I want separate elements, I go in and I find them. Let's find something else to use on my list. Let's see what I've got. I just like that picture of a crocodile so much. I want to use it somewhere. Not quite yet though. Okay, so what have I got? Yeah, this thing. I don't know what this thing is, but isn't it cool? I have no idea what this is. However, this is something where perhaps I could say use this as armor plating. So I might go into my object here. Firstly, I'm going to make sure that my object is a rasterized layer. So I can just right click on that and rasterize. And then I might take a segment from my object, copy and paste that just to make it easier. And let's see what I want to do with that. So by holding down Shift, I can adjust some of the kind of like size and shape of this just by moving the object around. Or I could use the more competent version and use the warp tool. Again, you're often using a combination of these things, and you might also find that, yeah, sometimes the things you make with this, they are ugly. And again, you don't get super attached to things. You're just like, okay, if I made something ugly, that idea wasn't really working. So I'm kind of going here for what if I make like sort of like little, are they called pauldrons? When they're like, who knows about armor terms? When they're on your shoulders, they're like pauldrons or something, right? Yeah. So as I'm doing this, there you go. Thank you. It is pauldron. I'm going in. I'm going to just kind of erase areas that aren't working for me. And again, I'm just going to get my painting tool, which is a large brush at this point, and start sort of maybe sort of going, okay, let's add a little bit of defining shadow in here. I'm still doing this quite quickly. I'm not beholden to any of the brush strokes I make. If I was being quite careful, I might do this on a new layer or kind of think about this in advance. As it is, I'm not super worried because If I really love this, I can go in and polish it up later. If I don't love it, then it was an experiment. So all of this, it is extremely experimental. You are trying stuff out. You are trying to see what works. You are not trying to necessarily use this as a tool to make something that already exists, perhaps, although obviously you can as well. But you can use this as an iterative tool where you are using it to explore costume or proportions of a monster or what aliens look like or anything like that. And one of the huge benefits of this is just how quickly you can make something come to life. As you can tell, you don't need it to be perfect looking. It just needs to kind of be passable in order to trick your brain into seeing what it could be if, you spent a little more time on it. So as I'm doing this, I'm going in and I'm just sort of painting over things a tiny bit. Maybe I also want to, let's see, I'm going to just put in some big marks to give my character here something fun to wear around her middle. So this is not the color I will most likely stay with, but let's, so one thing you can do with clipping masks that's quite fun is, so let's say that this is a lovely shape that I've made for my character, and I want to put a texture into this. A lot of these will be things you guys have done before. You'll know about these, and it's just about thinking about what ways you can best use sort of these existing tools like clipping masks. So here is a cool texture. I'm going to right click on my texture here, make sure it's rasterized. It's a picture of the planet Jupiter. You don't have to use textures that are obviously related to the thing you're actually doing. You can use textures that are from pretty much anywhere. So something like this, I could go, okay, here is my texture. I can play around and rearrange it a little bit if I want. Which part of this do I want? Do I want to, I can go, okay, I found a piece of this that I quite like. And then perhaps on top of this, I can make another clipping mask and I can just gently paint in with, say, a multiply blend mode layer and go, okay, how am I going to put a couple sort of hints of, say, shadow in here? I'm going to do it quite big and rough just to get an idea of if it might work for me. And as I'm doing this, I'm also going to be changing the color of these pants because I've just realized that these are just the worst colored pants that I could have possibly chosen. And again, this is the benefit of stuff like clipping masks. I have a selective color layer here. It allows me now to, I can either go edit this myself and go, okay, let's make these a much nicer color. Let's adjust it so we get something that looks good with the blue tones that I appear to be currently exploring. As we can see, I'm doing things that aren't really working for me right now. You often spend a little while just adjusting colors, just sort of seeing what works. Not always to the greatest success. Again, everyone does things differently. The other thing I can do, maybe I hate that clipping mask. Maybe that was an awful idea. I can just go to hue and saturation, and I can just change the hue and saturation, as you can guess, of pretty much everything. So by doing this, I can make something suddenly that works a lot better for me. This was clearly the right idea. This selective color mask was not. Okay, cool. So again, now that I've got this in here, I might go back to my shadow layer and just try and give a suggestion of what's happening with, say, the folds of the material here. It doesn't need to be perfect. I can go in and edit stuff later. I would also recommend using a bit of reference for this. Like, for instance, if you could find a piece of cloth that already had the shadows attached, that would be ideal. But doing things like this can still be something that works, even if you're doing it quite fast and it's a little bit messy. So I'm now just adding in a tiny bit of light. And on top of this, I'm now going to start sort of like painting again. Okay, let's add a waist to this character's funny little shirt. And let's add sort of the bottom of this piece. So it is a lot of guesswork. So a lot of the time you just want to be brave with this. You want to just try things you haven't tried before. Sometimes that does mean you are doing stuff that doesn't work out. But if you only spend a couple minutes on it, it's not the end of the world when you then go, oh, that's ugly. And you stop doing it. So I can also use this to sort of start giving a sense of what kind of textures or patterns might I like. This is a great time to use a brush that turns when your pen turns, like this one here. So as you can see, as I tilt the pen, I get different directions of this line, which is very nice. It just allows me to nice and quickly figure out what I want to do. Let's add in a sense of texture like this. Cool, I'm getting an idea of what this character could potentially be. I'm making sure that I'm sharing some of these colors around. So let's say that these metal pauldron things, they are going to be picking up a bit of the blue tones. So I might use a soft light layer and just go in and not just in the pauldrons, but in other areas as well, just bring some of those blues into what I'm doing with my character. All of these nice big brush strokes, not being super particular about it. I have an idea of where my light source is, but it's pretty diffuse, and I can always adjust that later. So as I'm doing this, this is all quite rough, quite unclear in many regards. And I can also do things where, for instance, maybe I want to change my character's skin color and make them, when there's like elves and they make the elves like random colors, maybe I want to do something like that. Again, this is something that's quite easy to achieve with adjustment layers. So perhaps in this case, let's see if I want to make my character's skin kind of like an ashen sort of color. Let's see what I'm going to do. So using the adjustment layers that are like color balance allows you to affect both midtones, shadows, and the lighter areas of the character's skin. This means you're not just fully recoloring them, but you're still maintaining some of the natural undertones and light areas of the character. You want to think about how the light is colored, how the shadows are colored, and allow that to sort of influence what it is you do with the character's design. So we still have some warmth in here, just a little bit within this character. I don't want to go fully blue because it feels like that's quite unnatural. I just want to maintain a little bit of underlying blood color in there. Again, just tweaking things. Okay, we've got some kind of like, the kind of bluish elf look now. And I can sort of start going, okay, what other pieces do I want to add to this character's look? So this is always a process of going back and forth, trying new things, new pieces, new objects, seeing how things work, and half the time discarding them quite quickly, but occasionally finding something that works for you. So again, I'm now going to just sort of add a little bit of extra, armor or something to my character. I might think about where I'm going to be putting this. Maybe it's going to be sort of a fringe that goes around part of whatever the sort of sash at my character's waist is. So you can really just do this without having any idea of what necessarily the end goal is going to be. Obviously, it helps to have an idea of that because it will give you guiding structure and a sense of whether or not you're actually achieving your goal. But you can also just use it as a free-form iteration tool where you are going, okay, what might it look like if I create a blue elf? And that's my starting point. That's where I'm going to attempt to sort of go from, and everything else kind of follows on from there. So most of the time, when you're doing things like this, you make something, it's ugly, you don't like it, you get rid of it. You do that a lot. But you have to get, just like let yourself do it. Let yourself be bad at stuff for a while. It does take a while to figure out what you actually want, even within an individual image. You have to kind of accept that there's going to be things you make that you spend 10 minutes on, 20 minutes on, half an hour on, and then you step back, you look at it and you go, oof, never mind. And that's just part of the process. You're used to this, I imagine, already when it comes to, say, actually illustrating stuff. You're like, yeah, sometimes I spend ages on a picture and it's not very good by the time you're actually done with it. And that, but you know, you're still learning from that, you're still building something from that. You're not necessarily wasting that time, even if you did not get something that was like Instagram worthy at the end. And that shouldn't really be the goal. The idea of things like this is most often not to make something beautiful for your portfolio that shows the highest extent of your skills as an illustrator. It is really about finding a way to practice the making things muscle in a just like in a way you might not have done before. So if you haven't already, just jump into trying to make something. So I'm going to come walk around a little bit, talk to you guys a little bit, see how you're doing. You don't need to make something deeply beautiful with this, but it's a good fun to just try and make something. Don't lock yourself down too much to it has to be my character who's a princess who wears this and this and this. At least that just like for this exercise. Okay, oh, one more thing that I want to mention is, let's say I want to quickly apply some shadows and some lights to my character. This is when you use blend modes. Blend modes are great. So I've told you some of you guys about this before, but multiply. You probably know about some of these. If you do, feel free to just look away. Multiply, it lets me apply a shadow layer basically to everything. If I make this layer sort of a mid-blue grayish, pale grayish, sort of somewhere in this area, it will look like quite a natural shadow. So let's say I use this, and again, you'll notice I'm using a nice big brush. I'm going to go in with this. I'm going to just give a sense of where the shadows are going to be on my character. It's not perfect. It doesn't need to be. As I do this, I'm really just trying to feel out where I need to put the shadows to achieve a sense of realism. And again, the fact that I'm doing this super fast, super ugly, just means that if I make something and I don't like it, or I want to change it, I can go and easily change it. And that is extremely important to be able to have that flexibility. I will make this shadow a little bit darker so you can see it a little clearer. So we can see it here. I could also say erase some pieces of this just so I can get a better sense of the lighting. So still working quite fast, still being quite free with my brush strokes here. I can always go back in. If I do something good, I can go back in and tighten it up and make it work for me. So something like this, just quickly applying these shadows, these lights over the character, maybe using a little bit of a gradient, just, you know, some light brush strokes here, because I'm not trying to get super harsh light. I can adjust what color my shadows are if these shadows aren't quite working for me with hue saturation. Again, I can go for purple toned or orange toned shadows. And as you do this, you can kind of move through the spectrum and see what might work for you, for the character you're making, for the image you are building up. So as I do this, I'll just go for a sort of natural bluish light, but I will also add a light source. So again, a new layer, and I'm either going to use overlay or soft light. I find soft light is usually my friend. I want as pale as you can get, but maybe with a little bit of yellow in it. Let's see how this looks. So the fact is that even though I've made my character kind of bluish grayish, I still want a warm light source. So there's still going to be warm lights on my character's skin and clothing. Just because, you know, they are wearing, say, a blue shirt doesn't mean that that blue shirt won't pick up things from around them. Exactly the same when it comes to skin tones of unnatural characters, which I think is an easy sort of pitfall to fall into. So is this the most beautiful example? Not really. That's totally fine. I might make another layer that's, again, just going to add in a little extra brightness into my character. I'm just trying to achieve a sense of where the lights might be in this space. I am still kind of roughing it out a little bit. So some of these will be quite vibrant, for instance, and then I might go back in later. As you can see, that's quite vibrant, and sort of like paint into it or dissolve into it a little bit. I might lower the opacity on some of these. But as I'm doing stuff like this, I can then start to go, okay, am I achieving the sense I want with my character here? If I wanted to go back in and do some underpainting or to change something, like let's say I wanted to change this area here of pattern. Maybe I don't like what I've done with the Jupiter pattern. I've done some painting on top of that, so I'm not going to try and go in and actually change my original layers. I'm going to just paint some big chunks like this. Not everyone works this way. I work quite messily and then I tidy it up as I go along later. This is not the right or wrong way to do it. It's just a way. So I'm going to use this and I'm going to go find a cool texture that I like better. I'm going to use this picture of a bird, but I don't know how yet. I'm waiting for the Mac to stop spinning. Hello? The Mac is spinning. What does that mean? Okay, I canceled that action. Let's try that again, but with something that wasn't that bird, clearly. Okay, I'm bringing this dress back, even though it's ugly. And I can just make this here into a clipping mask. Again, rasterizing layer, create clipping mask. Obviously, this uses the entirety of the image. Maybe I'll just shrink this a little bit. Maybe I will warp it a little bit. And I will just start to go, okay, now I have this sort of like different pattern coming in. I'll change the colors of these so that they fit a little better. Again, it's all just playing around with stuff. A lot of the time, it's a matter of figuring out what works for you, what that looks like. Going, okay, if I like lower the opacity on this, does it make it better or worse, etc. And, you know, potentially going back in, putting those like light and shadow layers on it, going, okay, what am I doing here? Am I building up something that works for me? So I think the light and shadow sort of techniques are particularly useful, even when kind of clumsy at first, because what they really allow you to do is just try different light sources on your character. So I'm just going to do a different pass. Ideally, you would be using, you know, you'd be using reference for this, but sometimes we don't have reference. Sometimes we, for whatever reason, don't have that available. We can't find it, or we just want to try it out and see what it looks like before we go find some really polished reference we're going to paint with. So I'm going to take a little more time on this sort of second shadow layer here, but I'm still pretty rough with this. I'm trying not to make super harsh shadows, but I don't mind too much if I do. So you want to think about where the shadows from clothing would fall. So doing your shadow and light layers basically on top of everything else means that as I'm doing this, I can just decide to quickly add shadows that go over skin, over clothing. I can sort of add them here. If you were using reference, you would have a better grasp of kind of how dense the shadows are in different areas. This is also, you know, this is obviously quite realistic, but if you wanted to say, basically take your image after this and sort of start stylizing it, painting it up a little bit more, making it a little more exaggerated in some areas, this is still an extremely useful base to work on for that. Obviously, it requires a quite flexible sort of approach to how you do stylization, but it still can work quite well. The other thing to note is that it can be really useful just to throw in, basically, I'm going to say a shadow down here and a background layer that is a neutral color. So for me, I'm going to put down, it's not what I intended. Why is it blue? It's blue because I have a color balance layer affecting it. There we go. I'm going to go for a nice neutral gray. And I want it to be a gradient. And I'm using two. There we go. Okay. When I'm using a gradient, it always starts you off in this one that picks between two colors, like your background and your foreground colors, whatever those are selected. Nobody has ever liked this gradient tool. I don't understand why it exists. The one you want is the one that is under basics that goes to a faded grid. This one allows you to apply things like this over top of whatever you have underneath. It is extremely useful. I use it for everything. I went through most of university unaware that this existed as a tool until a friend showed it to me, and it made my entire process a lot simpler. You can put in elements, as you can see here, of like color of shadow into the background. You know, maybe you want to just give like a sort of a sense of, you know, it's a little smoky, it's a little misty or something. You don't want to spend ages on this either. It's really just to make sure that your character has something behind them so that the values aren't blown out of proportion too much. And so I can now go back in. I can go to my shadow layer here, erase some of the bits that aren't really necessary in shadow. Again, I should use reference with this. I haven't. You should definitely use reference. Often at this stage, what you'll be doing here, it's going to look a lot like you're putting down some kind of quick and ugly shadows to see how things look. That's fine. If I really liked these shadows, I would either refine them or I would go get actual reference and make sure that they work. So it's quite important when you have characters that don't have human skin tones in particular, that you are thinking about how the light is going to affect them. So sometimes it can be quite nice to try and bring them back to what we perceive as sort of like natural applications of color. So obviously, for instance, there is a lot of birds where the skin color beneath the feathers is a blue or a gray, but it will still have tinges of purple because there's blood. If your character has blue blood or green blood or something, that's going to be a color that is hiding underneath their skin. So you want to take that into account. How much that affects your coloring process, of course, is up to you, but I always recommend keeping in mind what it is the character is made of, so that if your character has blue skin, it's not just blue, it is allowed to sort of be a little more realistic in terms of how light and shadow are going to affect it. I'm just doing a quick sort of light pass here. I'm also trying to bring a little bit of warmth into this character with this multiply layer, this soft light layer. So although my character is going to have blue skin, I'm sort of allowing these colors in the skin, in the hair, things like that, to build up slowly through multiple applications of different layers. Making sure that things are on different layers is useful because it lets me use different blend modes on each, but also it lets me decide I don't like something and remove it quite easily, which is quite important. So you can also, as you can see, a lot of this, the end result can look a little bit messy. It can obviously have some warping from what you've done to these various items of clothing. Some people kind of lean into this and allow these sort of brush strokes to be seen. Other people might want to go in and tighten up some of these shapes. It is an annoying process sometimes when you spend a lot of time on something and it doesn't work, or when you start going in and say like what I'm doing now, where I'm trying to sort of paint over shapes. I'm kind of uncovering what these areas might look like as I go along. So I'm now trying to define what this sort of pauldron piece might be like. I'm trying to not go super cartoony with this, but it might mean that, say, I add a little bit of definition if I don't mind this as this in kind of the style I'm going for. I'm clicking random buttons because it's a Mac and I'm old and incompetent. There we go. Again, you just want to use the tools that are available to you, which means you have a couple brushes you use. I have a few that I like. Mess around until you find something that works for you. You don't need to worry about this being beautifully painted. You just need to find a way to make it recognizable to the human eye as what you're intending. In my last workshop, if you were here, people ended up with some really cool stuff at the end. I will say that this is a process where after an hour of it, you may end up with something that is perfectly a start. It is not something where you end up making beautiful pieces of art extremely quickly, and you don't necessarily want to expect that of yourself. I find that in the first about 2 hours of this, I will make an approximation of what my character is going to be. And then after that, I will spend the next 4 hours actually making it look good. Other people will have different processes. So a lot of you guys will know you can, go on YouTube, see what the guys on YouTube are up to, find out what other people's sort of like photocomping processes look like. A lot of people like to use 3D models, like for instance, faces, body parts, swords, weapons, armor. All of those things can be really useful as something you can bring into this process where maybe I've got a cool sword for my character. So I take my 3D model in that I've positioned carefully and then taken a picture of. When it comes to sort of this overpainting thing I'm doing, which is quite quick and ugly, I am constantly pressing down Option. I'm constantly activating the eyedropper tool so that I can pick up local colors and be painting with them. And I think this is the one digital painting thing that people just need to do more of, which is picking up local colors. Think of it like when you are traditionally painting with acrylics or oils. You are not only painting with what is on the brush, but you are moving around what is on the canvas. And that is going to be a big sort of part of how this can be taken from just whatever the starting photographs were and made into something of your own. A lot of things you can also just use a suggestion of what you're going for. So if I wanted to have, these sort of like loose straps or strings around between my character's shirt here, I don't need to go necessarily find a beautiful reference because I can really approximate this. I'm kind of leaning into a sort of stylization with a little bit of like a suggestion of line work here. Completely unnecessary unless it's what you're going for, but it lets me quickly build up these shapes, these patterns. But I'm building on top of what I've laid down already. So even when I am, say, going over, these patterns that I've put down, these this part of whatever this is, I'm still using it as a base to inform where I might go, what kind of colors that I might use, all of these different things.